At dawn, the rumor leaked through private schools and diplomatic lounges that Khalid Al-Nasser had quietly withdrawn applications from London and Boston, stunning advisors who assumed tradition would prevail. Khalid was not chasing prestige. He was escaping it. Raised inside guarded compounds, he had learned that elite systems reward obedience more than curiosity, and his children were beginning to mirror that stiffness. Manila entered his calculations accidentally, through a late-night call with a Filipino engineer who spoke about classrooms that argued back, teachers who stayed late, and cities that taught resilience faster than textbooks. Khalid recognized something uncomfortable. Unpredictability was the missing curriculum. He ordered background reports, not rankings, and found stories of immigrant grit, hybrid syllabi, and multilingual corridors where ambition was negotiated daily. The decision felt reckless, then precise. He imagined his son learning patience on crowded sidewalks, his daughter mastering empathy before calculus. Advisors warned of optics, peers whispered about standards, and family elders cautioned against deviation. Khalid listened, then booked tickets anyway. The shock was not the destination, it was the rejection of certainty. For the first time, his wealth did not dictate outcomes. It merely purchased freedom to choose uncertainty without apology or backward glances. News of the move rippled through Gulf boardrooms where education functioned as a signal, not a journey, and Khalid's phone filled with concern masquerading as curiosity. A cousin cited alumni networks, a banker mentioned passports, a minister warned of headlines. Khalid countered with questions nobody expected. How children learned courage, how failure was metabolized, how cities taught accountability. His own schooling had polished him, yet left blind spots he paid consultants to navigate. Manila promised friction without cruelty, ambition without anesthesia. He studied schools blending British rigor with Filipino warmth, American debate with Asian discipline, and noticed graduates who returned home rather than fled. That return rate intrigued him more than test scores. He visited quietly, sitting in parent meetings, listening to students argue ethics in 3 languages, watching teachers correct with humor instead of fear. The city's contradictions felt instructive. Traffic enforced patience, neighborhoods taught negotiation, storms rehearsed contingency. Khalid realized wealth could cushion mistakes but could not manufacture character. By choosing Manila, he was not lowering a bar. He was relocating it to a place where balance mattered. The announcement, when it came, sounded calm. The consequences detonated elsewhere. Silence followed, then speculation, envy, and abrupt imitation globally. Behind closed doors, Khalid negotiated with himself more ruthlessly than with any counterpart, cataloging risks he could not hedge. Security teams mapped routes, accountants modeled costs, tutors assessed transitions. None could quantify humility. His children sensed the shift before explanations arrived, asking why friends would change and accents would blur. Khalid answered honestly, admitting uncertainty as a skill worth practicing. In Manila, the first weeks tested resolve. Schedules bent, assumptions snapped, and the children discovered classrooms where answers invited rebuttal. They struggled, then adapted, learning to speak up without entitlement. Khalid watched their posture change. Evenings filled with stories about classmates juggling work and study, about teachers who demanded excellence while acknowledging context. The city did not flatter them, it confronted them. Khalid's peers misread discomfort as decline, but he recognized growth wearing unfamiliar clothes. He declined invitations that implied regret, choosing instead to walk markets, read local papers, and learn names without titles. The billionaire was becoming apparent again, accountable to outcomes money could not expedite. Education had stopped being a purchase. It was a partnership with unpredictability, negotiated daily. Every choice sharpened responsibility, eroding shortcuts, demanding presence, patience, listening, courage, consistency, and humility learned through repeated effort. Critics framed the decision as branding, assuming philanthropy disguised indulgence, yet Khalid refused sponsorships and declined interviews. He wanted results to speak without captions. Months passed, then patterns emerged. His children's grades stabilized, but more striking were questions they asked at dinner. They debated fairness, public transport, climate trade-offs, and why success obligated service. Khalid traced these discussions to Manila's everyday negotiations, where privilege met proximity. He noticed his daughter volunteering unprompted, his son organizing classmates across divides. The schools encouraged rigor, but the city supplied stakes. When a typhoon disrupted routines, contingency plans became lessons in leadership. Khalid realized resilience was not taught, it was practiced. Meanwhile, whispers intensified among elites, some copying quietly, others scoffing loudly. Khalid welcomed neither. He had learned that conviction weakened when advertised. The children's confidence grew quieter, sturdier, less performative. London and Boston remained excellent, but excellence alone was insufficient. Khalid was not rejecting the West. He was recalibrating what preparation meant in a volatile century. Manila, imperfect and demanding, offered rehearsal for reality. It trained judgment under pressure, empathy across difference, adaptability amid scarcity, and purpose beyond applause earned slowly, tested publicly, sustained privately, repeatedly until habits hardened into values for life. Years later, outcomes silenced debate more effectively than arguments ever could. Khalid's children navigated universities globally with composure, selecting paths rather than chasing names. They credited Manila for teaching discernment before ambition. Khalid observed how peers who copied the move without commitment retreated, proving location was secondary to intent. The real shock had never been geography. It was a billionaire declining autopilot. By choosing Manila early, Khalid disrupted a script that equated safety with sameness. His wealth still opened doors, but his children knocked differently. They asked who benefited, who was missing, and what trade-offs mattered. Khalid understood that education was not insulation from chaos. It was training to operate within it. The city had been a crucible, not a refuge. Looking back, Khalid rejected triumphalism. The choice had costs, missteps, and doubts. Yet it restored agency to parenting in an age of outsourcing. When asked privately if he would choose differently, Khalid answered with a question of his own. Where do children learn to live before learning to win? Manila had answered, without promising comfort, only competence. That lesson endured, unsettling elites, empowering families, and reframing success as stewardship rather than spectacle measured across generations, not headlines or rankings. The story did not end with adaptation. It complicated itself when Khalid noticed how Manila changed him as much as his children. Accustomed to insulation, he now encountered contradiction daily, and it dismantled assumptions faster than consultants ever had. Meetings ran late, promises flexed, and solutions emerged through conversation rather than hierarchy. At first, this felt inefficient. Then he recognized efficiency had blinded him to human variables. His children mirrored this recalibration, learning patience without surrender, confidence without dominance. Khalid began funding scholarships quietly, not as charity but reciprocity, understanding that environments thrive when investment circulates. He refused naming rights, insisting anonymity sharpened accountability. Friends misinterpreted this restraint as guilt. It was clarity. Manila taught him that visibility diluted purpose. In schools, his children confronted peers who questioned privilege directly, not with hostility but curiosity. Those conversations unsettled them, then strengthened them. Khalid saw leadership forming not through command but through listening. The billionaire's calendar shifted, prioritizing school forums over summits. He declined deals misaligned with values his children now articulated aloud. Wealth, once abstract, became contextual. Manila had reframed success as impact felt locally before scaled globally. Khalid realized education was not preparation for the world, it was immersion in it, imperfect, demanding, corrective. The city refused to be background. It insisted participation, humility, responsiveness, and sustained engagement every single day without exception. Resistance intensified when extended family gathered for a wedding and Khalid's choice became unavoidable conversation. Elders questioned lineage responsibility. Younger cousins admired the audacity. Khalid listened carefully, avoiding defense. He explained that legacy decays when preserved untouched, and must be tested to remain useful. Manila was that test. His children spoke for themselves, not rehearsed, describing classrooms where disagreement sharpened thinking, where community service counted, and where failure carried consequences without stigma. The room quieted. Doubt lingered, but certainty cracked. Khalid noticed how his children navigated critique without collapsing or counterattacking. That resilience validated every risk taken. Back in Manila, challenges escalated. Academic pressure increased, friendships fractured, and identity questions surfaced. Khalid resisted intervention, trusting process over control. He learned to coach rather than command. Teachers communicated candidly, refusing favoritism despite knowing his resources. That integrity mattered. When a project failed publicly, his son absorbed responsibility instead of outsourcing blame. Khalid recognized a turning point. The children no longer needed the decision justified. They owned it. Manila had ceased being a choice imposed by a parent. It became terrain they understood. Education transformed from transaction to transformation, irreversible and demanding. Khalid accepted that the outcome he sought was not advantage, but alignment between values, action, and consequence sustained under pressure. As global uncertainty deepened, friends quietly sought Khalid's counsel, no longer mocking, now curious. He refused formulas, offering only questions. Where would their children learn judgment under stress? Who would challenge them without incentive? Which environment punished arrogance and rewarded contribution? Manila had done all three. Khalid observed how crises abroad rattled insulated systems while his children adapted fluidly, accustomed to contingency. They discussed politics with nuance, economics with empathy, and ambition with restraint. Khalid saw how exposure to complexity inoculated against absolutism. He invested in local partnerships, aligning capital with educational infrastructure, careful to avoid dependency. The city responded with guarded trust, earned slowly. Khalid accepted limits, understanding influence must be negotiated. His children thrived not because Manila was romanticized, but because it was honest. It reflected consequences quickly. When peers stumbled, support appeared, but accountability followed. Khalid contrasted this with environments where mistakes disappeared behind resources. Here, they echoed. That echo taught responsibility. He realized the shock that once dominated headlines had matured into quiet proof. The elite stopped asking why Manila. They asked how to replicate results without replicating courage. Khalid knew the answer disappointed them. There was no shortcut. Education required surrendering control, enduring ambiguity, and allowing children to confront reality early. Manila had simply refused to soften that encounter, insisting growth remain earned, visible, and shared collectively. The children's graduation approached without fanfare, a deliberate choice Khalid supported. They invited teachers, classmates, and neighbors, declining spectacle. Khalid watched pride shift from ownership to appreciation. The children thanked the city publicly, crediting discomfort as their greatest instructor. Khalid reflected on how easily he might have chosen comfort instead. That alternative life glimmered briefly, then faded. Manila had rewritten expectations. When offers arrived from institutions worldwide, the children evaluated culture before curriculum. Khalid observed their discernment with quiet satisfaction. They rejected environments promising ease without challenge. Manila had calibrated their compass. Meanwhile, analysts attempted to quantify the phenomenon, publishing think pieces that missed the essence.
Khalid déclined participation.
He understood that the lesson resisted abstraction. It required lived experience. When a peer accused him of gambling with his children's futures, Khalid replied calmly that refusing to gamble was the real risk. Stability without relevance bred fragility. Manila had been volatile, yes, but instructive. It trained adaptation as habit. Khalid noticed how his children mentored others, translating lessons without evangelizing. The shock had become a standard. Education, once a marker of status, transformed into preparation for stewardship. Khalid accepted that outcomes would continue unfolding beyond his influence. That relinquishment, too, was learned. Manila had taught him when to lead and when to step back, trusting competence forged through experience rather than protection. Looking forward, Khalid measured success differently. Not by rankings or returns, but by how calmly his children confronted uncertainty. Manila had normalized complexity, making chaos navigable rather than paralyzing. The children spoke of returning someday, not out of nostalgia, but obligation. Khalid recognized that education had anchored them to responsibility. He continued investing selectively, prioritizing systems that multiplied agency rather than dependency. Peers still debated optics, but the narrative had shifted. Choosing Manila no longer signaled eccentricity, it signaled intentionality. Khalid never claimed universality. He insisted only on honesty. For his family, this path corrected imbalances wealth had introduced. It restored friction essential for growth. As time passed, the story lost its novelty, but gained weight. It circulated quietly among parents reconsidering assumptions. Khalid welcomed that silence. He had learned that meaningful decisions rarely announce themselves. They reveal value gradually, through behavior. Manila had done exactly that. It stripped illusion, demanded participation, and rewarded effort without flattery. Khalid accepted that the real education had been mutual. His children learned to live in the world, and he learned to let them. The shock was never about abandoning London or Boston. It was about abandoning fear disguised as tradition. That realization endured, reshaping legacy through courage rather than inheritance alone. Years unfolded with subtle tests that exposed whether Manila's influence would endure beyond novelty. Khalid observed his children confronting privilege among peers without guilt or denial, acknowledging advantage while refusing exemption from effort. They negotiated group projects where leadership rotated, absorbing frustration without retreat. Khalid noticed how quickly they identified performative success, choosing substance instead. Manila had taught pattern recognition beyond textbooks. When internships beckoned, the children evaluated mentors' character before compensation. Khalid recognized a recalibration of instinct. He recalled his own early years, optimized for accumulation, not alignment. The city's imprint resisted erosion. Even during visits abroad, his children questioned systems that insulated failure, noting how comfort sometimes muted accountability. Khalid listened, aware that critique now flowed upward. He welcomed it. Education had inverted hierarchy inside the family. Manila had trained independent judgment. When setbacks arrived, the children processed disappointment analytically, extracting lessons rather than excuses. Khalid realized resilience was no longer reactive, it was procedural. The decision years earlier continued compounding quietly. No single milestone marked success. Instead, coherence emerged between values and behavior. Manila had not simplified life. It had clarified it. Khalid accepted that clarity carried weight, responsibility, and restraint. Watching his children choose service roles alongside ambition, he understood legacy was shifting from preservation to contribution. That shift justified every doubt endured, every warning ignored, and every risk accepted without guarantees. Public curiosity resurfaced when one child declined a lucrative offer to join a civic innovation project in Southeast Asia. Commentators speculated influence. Khalid said nothing. The decision reflected Manila's lessons about proximity to problems. Wealth had made distance easy. Education had reversed that instinct. Khalid watched his children work alongside people with fewer buffers, negotiating constraints creatively. They neither romanticized hardship nor avoided it. Manila had taught respect without spectacle. Khalid reflected on how education ecosystems signal expectations. Here, contribution mattered more than pedigree. He noticed how his children absorbed critique without defensiveness, treating feedback as data. That posture contrasted sharply with peers trained to protect image. Manila had rewarded adaptability over polish. Khalid continued observing from the margins, resisting intervention. The temptation to smooth paths remained, but restraint honored the process. When challenges escalated, his children sought counsel selectively, demonstrating discernment rather than dependency. Khalid recognized a maturity forged by exposure. He saw how networks formed organically, not through introductions. Trust accrued through reliability. Manila had recalibrated social capital from access to accountability. Khalid realized the choice years earlier continued generating optionality grounded in competence. The elite still debated prestige, but Khalid's household debated impact. That shift permeated decisions, conversations, and aspirations. Education had become an ethic, not a credential, guiding action across borders, institutions, and cultures with consistency. Unexpectedly, Khalid confronted skepticism from another angle when policymakers asked whether Manila's model could scale. He declined frameworks, emphasizing conditions over replication. Education thrived when ecosystems aligned incentives with values. Manila's strength lay in honest feedback loops. Khalid warned that importing aesthetics without accountability would fail. His children echoed this caution, refusing to become symbols. They preferred practitioners. Khalid noticed how their language avoided absolutes, favoring trade-offs. Manila had taught nuance. As global volatility intensified, this nuance proved invaluable. The children navigated polarized spaces calmly, mediating rather than inflaming. Khalid reflected on how early exposure to complexity inoculated against simplistic narratives. He observed his children mentoring peers, translating lessons without evangelizing. That restraint reflected confidence. Manila had normalized humility. When setbacks hit personal projects, they recalibrated swiftly, avoiding sunk-cost traps. Khalid recognized decision-making maturity. He contrasted this with environments where prestige discouraged course correction. Manila had taught responsiveness. Khalid's own leadership evolved accordingly. He shortened feedback cycles, diversified perspectives, and rewarded dissent. The educational choice reverberated beyond family. It influenced governance style, investment philosophy, and risk assessment. Khalid realized that education, done honestly, reshaped systems indirectly through behavior. Manila had been the catalyst, not the content. It supplied friction that refined judgment. The results resisted metrics, but manifested consistently. That consistency became the quiet answer to every lingering question, rendering debates increasingly irrelevant over time. When asked privately whether fear ever surfaced, Khalid admitted it had never fully disappeared. Fear simply lost authority. Manila had trained courage as practice, not bravado. The children acknowledged uncertainty without paralysis, planning contingencies reflexively. Khalid noticed how they evaluated environments for learning density rather than comfort. That heuristic guided choices. He saw them decline opportunities misaligned with values, absorbing opportunity cost deliberately. Manila had taught them that saying no preserved integrity. Khalid recognized the rarity of that skill among the affluent. He reflected on how traditional elite pathways often conflated safety with success. Manila had disrupted that equation. It rewarded initiative under constraint. The children maintained relationships across socio-economic lines without condescension. Khalid recognized empathy grounded in experience. When confronted with failure, they documented lessons, institutionalizing learning. Khalid mirrored this discipline in his enterprises. The feedback loop tightened. Education had become organizational culture. Khalid observed how the initial shock faded into precedent. Parents quietly recalibrated, considering environments previously dismissed. Manila's reputation evolved, not through marketing, but alumni behavior. Khalid accepted that influence flowed indirectly. The city had not promised outcomes. It had demanded effort. That demand shaped character. Khalid understood that the decision's value lay not in exceptionalism, but in restoring friction essential for growth. Manila had provided it generously, consistently, and without flattery. That gift continued paying dividends across choices yet to come. As time advanced, Khalid reframed the narrative internally. The choice had never been anti-West or pro-East. It was pro-reality. Manila had served as a mirror, reflecting consequences honestly. His children carried that realism into every arena. Khalid watched them assess risk with clarity, balancing optimism with prudence. He noticed how they welcomed disagreement, mining it for insight. Manila had taught that progress required tension. Khalid's peers eventually stopped asking for explanations. Outcomes spoke softly. The children's trajectories resisted prediction, yet remained coherent. Khalid recognized coherence as the truest metric. Education had aligned intention with action. He acknowledged moments of doubt, but never regret. The city's imperfections had been instructive. They demanded engagement. Khalid realized that insulation was the enemy of growth. Manila had dismantled insulation methodically. The children continued returning periodically, not as beneficiaries, but contributors. Khalid observed how obligation replaced nostalgia. That transformation confirmed success. He reflected on how the original shock had unsettled elites because it questioned defaults. Defaults endured unexamined until disrupted. Manila had disrupted Khalid's family productively. He accepted that legacy would unfold unpredictably. Education had not guaranteed outcomes, it had guaranteed preparedness. That distinction mattered. Khalid understood that wealth could open doors, but preparation determined passage. Manila had trained passage. The story's power lay in that quiet competence, replicable only through courage, humility, and sustained exposure to reality. Khalid noticed an unexpected consequence as his children matured. They became comfortable being misunderstood. Manila had trained them to prioritize substance over approval. When peers questioned unconventional choices, they responded with clarity, not defensiveness. Khalid recognized this as a rare advantage. Many elites optimized for consensus. His children optimized for correctness under uncertainty. The city had normalized dissent without alienation. Khalid observed how they navigated institutions patiently, challenging systems respectfully while refusing to surrender principles. This balance proved powerful. He recalled how earlier environments punished deviation subtly, steering ambition into predictable lanes. Manila had widened lanes. The children embraced interdisciplinary paths, connecting technology, policy, and community outcomes. Khalid saw how early exposure to inequality sharpened ethical reasoning without breeding resentment. Manila had insisted on realism. When one child faced a public setback, recovery followed methodically, grounded in accountability. Khalid understood that failure no longer threatened identity. It informed it. He reflected on how education often promised confidence but delivered fragility. Manila reversed that equation. Confidence emerged from competence earned under constraint. Khalid felt relief more than pride. The burden of overprotection had lifted. His role had shifted permanently. He no longer engineered outcomes. He safeguarded values. The city had done the rest. Manila remained present not as memory, but as method, shaping decisions long after departure. At international gatherings, Khalid listened as educators debated future skills, often abstractly. He refrained from interventions, noting how Manila had operationalized theory through necessity. Adaptability was not taught. It was required. The children demonstrated this when global disruptions altered plans overnight. They recalibrated calmly, reframing obstacles as constraints to design around. Khalid recognized a mindset cultivated early. Manila had normalized disruption. The children valued feedback from diverse sources, not just authority. That openness attracted collaborators. Khalid observed networks forming without orchestration. Trust accumulated through reliability. He contrasted this with transactional alliances common among elites. Manila had privileged contribution over signaling. Khalid's investments mirrored this ethos, favoring projects with community accountability. He noticed how his decision years earlier continued influencing resource allocation indirectly. Education had reshaped incentives. When policymakers revisited the narrative, Khalid emphasized patience. Results emerged over years, not quarters. Manila had taught temporal humility. The children evaluated progress longitudinally, resisting premature conclusions. Khalid found this discipline rare and invaluable. He acknowledged that uncertainty remained permanent. Yet fear no longer dictated choices. Manila had trained endurance. It demanded engagement, not certainty. Khalid accepted that the story's meaning lay in process, not destination. Education had become a lifelong negotiation with reality, grounded in responsibility and adaptability, reinforced through habits forged early and sustained deliberately across contexts. As the children assumed leadership roles, Khalid observed how they decentralized authority instinctively. Manila had taught them that resilience scaled through distribution, not control. They built teams emphasizing trust and transparency, correcting course publicly when needed. Khalid recognized the city's influence in these decisions. Accountability had been visible there, unavoidable. The children invited critique, treating it as infrastructure. Khalid reflected on how uncommon this posture remained among privileged peers. Education had recalibrated ego. When faced with ethical dilemmas, the children prioritized long-term impact over immediate gain. Manila's lessons surfaced again. The city had enforced consequences quickly. That memory guided judgment. Khalid accepted that his initial fear of reputational risk had inverted. Reputation now followed behavior, not vice versa. He noticed how quietly the narrative traveled. Parents approached discreetly, seeking counsel. Khalid offered honesty without prescription. Manila worked because intent aligned with environment. Without that alignment, geography alone failed. The children resisted myth-making, focusing on practice. Khalid admired this restraint. The shock years earlier had matured into standard operating procedure. Education had become continuous calibration. Manila had introduced friction, but also coherence. Khalid understood that the true dividend was optionality anchored in competence. The children navigated complexity without spectacle. That steadiness, forged under constraint, validated the decision beyond debate, rendering rankings irrelevant and legacy tangible through sustained contribution rather than acclaim. Time revealed another layer: gratitude without dependency. The children expressed appreciation for Manila while refusing to freeze it in nostalgia. They engaged critically, acknowledging flaws without withdrawal. Khalid recognized maturity. Education had taught them to hold complexity without absolution or dismissal. When they contributed resources, they demanded metrics and community oversight. Manila had taught skepticism of easy narratives. Khalid mirrored this rigor. His philanthropic strategies shifted from donation to partnership. Education had aligned ethics with execution. The children navigated cultural contexts sensitively, avoiding projection. Khalid observed how early exposure to diversity inoculated against simplification. Manila had forced listening. When confronted with privilege, they neither apologized excessively nor denied it. They leveraged it responsibly. Khalid recognized leadership emerging organically. The city's lessons persisted. He understood that the shock headline years earlier had obscured the quieter truth. The decision's success depended on daily discipline. Manila had provided feedback relentlessly. Khalid accepted that education's most valuable outputs resisted publicity. They appeared in decision quality, resilience under stress, and ethical consistency. He saw these attributes compound. The children mentored younger students, transmitting lessons without doctrine. Khalid realized replication occurred through behavior. Manila's influence extended invisibly. The story endured not as anomaly, but as precedent challenging defaults gently, persistently, and effectively over time. In reflection, Khalid distilled the journey into a simple insight: preparation mattered more than protection. Manila had prepared his children to engage reality without illusions. The city demanded participation, not spectatorship. Khalid understood that the elite had been shocked because certainty had been disrupted. Tradition often masqueraded as safety. Manila exposed that assumption. The children's lives unfolded with coherence rather than predictability. Khalid accepted uncertainty as permanent. Education had trained discernment, not destiny. When asked privately whether he would advise others to follow, Khalid answered cautiously. He advised honesty about values. Manila worked because it aligned with what his family sought to correct. Education was never neutral. It either reinforced defaults or challenged them. Manila had challenged them constructively. Khalid recognized that wealth amplified choices but did not guarantee wisdom. Education supplied the filter. The city had been uncompromising. It offered no shortcuts. That refusal proved invaluable. Khalid concluded that the true shock lay not in choosing Manila, but in choosing engagement over insulation. His children embodied that choice daily. Education had ceased to be a destination. It had become a method for navigating complexity responsibly. Manila had provided that method without spectacle, demanding effort, humility, and courage. The legacy persisted quietly, reshaping success as stewardship practiced across generations rather than inherited unquestioned.